Alright, this is the intro for the book of Daniel. Alright, and this will be in the MacArthur Study Bible. Alright, we'll start with the title. So, according to Hebrew custom, the title is drawn from the prophet who was who throughout the book he received revelations from God. Daniel bridges the entire 70 years of the Babylonian captivity, around 605 to 536 BC. And 9 of the 12 chapters relate revelation through dreams or visions. Daniel was God's mouthpiece to the Gentile and Jewish world, declaring God's current and future plans. What Revelation is to the New Testament prophetically and apocalyptically, Daniel is to the Old Testament. Okay, so the author and the date. So several verses indicate that the writer is Daniel, whose name means God is my judge. He wrote in the autobiographical first person from chapter 7, verse 2 on, and is to be distinguished from the other three Daniels of the Old Testament, 1 Chronicles 3:1, Ezra 8:2, and Nehemiah 10:6. As a teenager, probably about 15 years old, Daniel was kidnapped from his noble family in Judah, and he was deported to Babylon to be brainwashed into Babylonian culture for the task of assisting and dealing with the imported Jews. And there he spent the remainder of a long life, 85 years or more. And he made the most of the exile, successfully exalting God by his character and his service. He quickly rose to the role of a statesman by official royal appointment and served as a confidant of kings as well as a prophet for two major world empires, the Babylonian and the Medo-Persian. Christ confirmed Daniel as the author of this book in Matthew 24:15. And Daniel lived beyond the time described in Daniel 10:1, which was around 536 BC, and it seems most probable that he wrote the book shortly after this date, before 530 BC, and maybe he died around that time. And Daniel 2, chapter 2, verse 4b to 728, which prophetically describes the Gentile world history, was originally and appropriately written in Aramaic, the contemporary language of the international business. Ezekiel, Habakkuk, Jeremiah, and Zephaniah, they were Daniel's prophetic contemporaries. So, of course, they were around in the same time period. And the book begins, here's the background and setting. The book begins in 605 BC, where Babylon conquered Jerusalem and exiled Daniel and his three friends and others. It continues to the eventual demise of Babylonian supremacy in 539 BC, when Medo-Persian besiegers conquered Babylon. And of course, that'll be talked about in Daniel 5. And it goes even beyond that to 536 BC in Daniel 10:1. And after Daniel was transported to Babylon, the Babylonian victors conquered Jerusalem in two further stages. In 597 BC, they took some more people into exile, including Ezekiel, and then ultimately 586 BC, when they destroyed the city of Jerusalem and took everyone else into exile, well, except the prophet Jeremiah and some others. Alright. In both takeovers, they deported Jewish captives, and Daniel passionately remembered his home, particularly the temple at Jerusalem, almost 70 years after having been taken away from it, even though, of course, it got destroyed. Daniel's background is alluded to in part by Jeremiah, who names 3 of the last 5 kings in Judah before Judah's captivity. Yeah, Josiah, Jehoakim, and Zedekiah, and Jehoaz, and Jehoiachin. Yeah. Well, actually, Jehoaz and Jehoiachin are actually not mentioned. So, it's Josiah, Jehoakim, and Zedekiah that are mentioned. All right. So, and Daniel is also mentioned by Ezekiel. Yep, as being righteous and wise. He's alluded to by the writer of the Hebrews as one of the prophets who through faith stopped the mouths of lions. Oh yeah, Hebrews 11. The long-continued sin of the Judeans without national repentance eventually led to God's judgment, for which Jeremiah, Habakkuk, and Zephaniah had given a fair warning, but of course the people didn't listen. Earlier, Isaiah and other faithful prophets of God also trumpeted the danger. Yeah, Isaiah like 100 years before. And when Assyrian power had ebbed by 625, the Neo-Babylonians conquered. Number 1, they conquered Assyria with its capital. The prophet Nahum prophesied that. Went through the book of Nahum. You can go check out those videos. But Nineveh fell in 612 BC. Yep. Egypt in the following years ultimately fell to Babylonians, and then eventually Judah in 605 when they overthrew Jerusalem in the first of the 3 steps of deportations. Daniel was one of the first groups of deportees, and then of course Ezekiel was in the second deportations in 597. Now, Israel of the northern kingdom, of course, had already fallen to Assyria already in 722 BC. With Judah's captivity, the judgment was complete. And in Babylon, Daniel received God's word concerning successive stages of Gentile world domination through the centuries until the greatest conqueror, the Messiah, would put down all the Gentile lordship. He will then defeat all foes and raise his covenant people to blessing in his glorious millennial kingdom. Oh yeah, Daniel 2. So stay tuned. Alright, so here's some historical and theological themes of Daniel. So Daniel was written to encourage the exiled Jews by revealing God's program for them, both during and after the time of Gentile power in the world. Prominent above every other theme in the book is God's sovereign control over the affairs of all rulers and nations, and their final replacement with the true king, Jesus. The key verses are Daniel 2, verses 20 through 22, and verse 44. Yep. Or 2:37, or 28, and even chapter 4, verse 34 through 35, and even 6:25 through 27. God has not suffered defeat in allowing Israel's fall, but was providentially working his sure purposes toward an eventual full display of his King, the exalted Christ. He sovereignly allowed the Gentiles to dominate Israel. Of course, Babylon from 605 to 639. Oh, no, to 539, sorry, no. Medo-Persia from 539 to around 331 BC, and then of course Greece 331 through 146 BC, and then of course the Romans from 146 BC to 476 AD. Yeah, all the way, all the way to and even all the way to the second coming of Christ, which of course hasn't happened yet. These stages in Gentile power are set up in chapters 2 and 7. The same theme also embraces Israel's experience both in defeat and finally in her kingdom blessing in chapters 8 through 12. And a key aspect within the overarching theme of God's kingly control is Messiah's coming to rule the world in glory over all men. He is like a stone in chapter 2 and also like a son of man in chapter 7. In addition, he's the anointed one, or Messiah, in chapter 9, verse 26. Chapter 9 provides the chronological framework from Daniel's time to Christ's kingdom. And a second theme woven into the fabric of Daniel is the display of God's sovereign power through miracles. Daniel's era is one of 6 in the Bible, with a major focus on miracles by which God accomplished his purposes. Other periods include, number 1, the creation and the flood, of course the first 11 chapters of Genesis, and the patriarchs and Moses, all the way through the rest of the Torah, from Genesis 12 to the end of Deuteronomy. Patriarchs and Moses, and then of course Elijah and Elisha from 1 Kings 17 through 2 Kings 13. And then 4, Jesus and the Apostles, the Gospels and Acts. And 5, the time of the Second Advent, the Revelation. And there you go. And then of course Daniel. God, who has an everlasting dominion and ability to work according to his will, is capable of miracles, all of which would be lesser displays of power than what was exhibited whenever he acted as creator in Genesis 1:1. Yeah, and I actually heard Christian apologist Frank Turek say, what's the biggest miracle in the Bible? It's not the resurrection. The greatest miracle in the Bible is the first verse. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. If that verse is true, then every other verse is at least possible. Yep. Yeah, that all those other miracles are basically, it's kind of like child's play, really, compared to that one. So, yeah, even rising from the dead. And even Joe Rogan has kind of realized that, too. So that's actually, it would take more faith to believe really we came from nothing than that maybe there really was a resurrection. But anyway, yeah, well, I hope he becomes a believer at some point. But anyway, all right, well, I wanted to throw that in there with that mention of that Genesis 1:1 there. All right, well, Daniel chronicles the God-enabled recounting and interpreting of dreams which God used to reveal his will, chapters 2, 4, and 7. And other miracles included 1, the writing on the wall and Daniel's interpretation of it in Daniel 5. Of course, the famous saying, the writing's on the wall. 2, the protection of the 3 men in the blazing furnace. Of course, that famous story. Chapter 3, and then of course the other famous story, God's provision of safety for Daniel in the lion's den in chapter 6, and even supernatural prophecies, chapters 2, 7, 8, and then 9:24 through the end of chapter 12. Okay, so now some interpretive challenges basically with the book. So the main challenges center on interpreting passages about future tribulation and kingdom promises. Though the use of imperial Aramaic and archaeology have confirmed the early date of this writing, some skeptical interpreters unwilling to acknowledge the supernatural prophecies that came to pass, there are over 100 in chapter 11 alone that were fulfilled, they place these details in the intertestamental times. I think I heard it said maybe they were written around Daniel was actually written around the 2nd century. And they see these prophecies not as miraculously being fulfilled, not miraculously fulfilling the future, but as simply the observations of a later writer who is recording events of his own day. Yeah, I don't think so. Thus, they date Daniel in the days of Antiochus Epiphanes IV, who was in the 2nd century BC, around 175 through 164 BC. And according to this scheme, the expectation of the stone and the Son of Man turned out to be a mistaken notion that did not actually come to pass, or the writer was just being intentionally deceptive. Actually, a future 7-year judgment period in a literal 1,000-year kingdom after Christ's second coming, when he will reign over the Israelites and Gentiles, are taught. And of course, not everybody agrees with the 1,000-year millennial kingdom and the 7-year tribulation. I mean, different views on end times, but MacArthur believed that, so I'm going to go with that here. So, alright. And I guess this argument of it being written later, I guess probably that came from liberal scholars, probably. Yeah. Of course, the people that don't want to believe in the supernatural aspects of the Bible. So in order to get around those, I guess you got to place it later than it actually was. Because if it was actually written before those events happened, well then it's evidence that it's true. If it was written beforehand and it got all those events right. Yep. And Lord willing, I'll get to that in Daniel 11. So the literal interpretation of prophecy, leads, including Daniel, it leads to the premillennial perspective. Yeah, well, maybe some would disagree, but that's fine. There will be a new era before and distinct from the final, an absolute perfect ultimate state, the new heaven and the new earth, with its capital, the New Jerusalem. Yeah, of course, Revelation 21, 20, and 22. And many other aspects of interpretation challenge readers, like interpreting numbers, identifying the one like the Son of Man, which of course that's Jesus, obviously, determining whether to see Antiochus of the past or the Antichrist of the far future in chapter 8, or explaining the 77s, the 7 weeks prophecy at the end of Daniel 9, and deciding whether Antiochus of chapter 11 is still meant in 11:36 through 45, or whether he actually is, or whether that's actually talking about the future Antichrist. Okay, well, I'm sure that these challenges will get dealt with in the notes, basically. Yeah. Alright, well, here's a basic outline of the book. Alright, so number 1, the personal background. This is the first chapter of Daniel. You have the conquest of Jerusalem, the first 2 verses. Conscription of Jews for training, verses 3 through 7. Courage of the 4 men in trial, 8 through 16. And then choice of 4 men for royal positions, 17 through 21. And then 2, the prophetic course of Gentile domination or dominion. There you go. Chapters 2 through 7. So 1, you got dilemmas of Nebuchadnezzar, 2 through 4. And then debauchery and demise of Belshazzar, chapter 5. And then, of course, the deliverance of Daniel in 6. And then the dream of Daniel in 7. And then number 3, the prophetic course of Israel's destiny, 8 through 12. The prophecy of the ram and male goat in 8, prophecy of 70 weeks, and Daniel's prayer on behalf of the people Israel also in Daniel 9, and then prophecy of Israel's humiliation and restoration in 10 through 12. Of course, 12 has the final resurrection that's promised. Yep. And there you go. That's the intro. And Lord willing, I'll get to chapter 1 another time. I might use the endearing word commentary on this. We'll see. But Lord willing, until then, may God bless you, and the grace and mercy won by Jesus and the fellowship of the Spirit be with you all.